Hello, everybody. My name is Wiley Cash, and I'm your host for the Southern Independent Bookseller Alliance's special online series, Reader Meet Writer. I've been hosting these events for well over a year, and normally authors with new books out would be in a bookstore, hopefully in your community, somewhere here in the southern part of the United States, and COVID's made that a little more difficult, but coincidentally, I'm actually joining you live from Quail Ridge Books in Raleigh, North Carolina, because I am on tour in support of my new novel, When Ghosts Come Home, which we will be talking about tonight. I had a book signing out on the sidewalk for a couple of hours, just kind of hanging out with people and signing books and seeing a couple of old friends and meeting new readers and trying to keep folks as safe as possible. I've been all over North Carolina, and I'll be all over the place for the next couple of weeks. And if I get to see you, if I get to see half of your face, I'll be absolutely thrilled. But in lieu of that, we're going to be here doing these virtual events for the next little bit. SIBA stands for the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance, and this is an organization that represents just under 700 bookstores throughout the Southeast, independently owned bookstores. And perhaps you learned about my event tonight with J.D. Jackson, the audiobook narrator of When Ghosts Come Home, from one of those independently owned bookstores. And if that's the case, I encourage you to buy my book from one of those independently owned bookstores that brought you to this dance. What you can also do is purchase the audiobook of When Ghosts Come Home from Libro FM, who is so kind to sponsor this event with us. And tonight they are going to be giving away a free 3-month membership to Libro FM, which gets you 3 free audiobooks of your choice. So if you would, in the comments, just enter the best email address that you have, and we will choose someone randomly at the end of the show, and we will announce who is getting the free audiobooks from Libro FM. Just your email address. You don't have to enter the place you're from, any of that stuff. And we'll just randomly choose one of those email addresses. And you can do that at any time. Enter it into the Q&A, and it won't disturb anything at all. This is our last event for a little while. It's been a great experience being with you. We have some more events planned in the future, but nothing imminent. And so that is why tonight is very special for me. We are talking about my newly released novel, When Ghosts Come Home, which came out on Tuesday from William Morrow HarperCollins. And something that I'm particularly excited about tonight is that the book's narrator, the audiobook's narrator, J.D. Jackson, is going to be with us. And I want to tell you a little bit about him. But while we are talking, if anything comes to mind that you have questions about, if you have questions about the novel that I wrote, how I researched the novel, where the idea came from, if you have questions for JD about how he approaches his work as a narrator, what he looks for when he gets engaged with a project, what the experience of rolling out an audiobook is like, you can ask questions of both of us. Just go down to the Q&A button, and at the end of the show, we'll spend a little time answering those questions. When you type your question in, make sure to mention your name and the name of your home independently owned bookstore, and we'll give them a shout out on the air. But for now, I want to introduce tonight's special guest. J.D. Jackson is an actor, audiobook narrator, and acting instructor. He honed his craft while receiving a BA from Dillard University and an MFA from Temple University. He's enjoyed success in both the film and television industry, guest starring on such shows as House, ER, and Law and Order. He's won numerous awards for his audiobook narration, including several Earphones Awards, multiple Audio Award nominations, and was recently inducted into AudioFile Magazine's Golden Voices Hall of Fame. It's my great pleasure and honor, and with a true sense of excitement, to spend some time with him to introduce J.D. Jackson. J.D., thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I told you how much I love this book, so I'm ready to roll and get into this. It's so much to talk about. So
yeah,
thank
definitely.
you for having me.
Absolutely. I got to tell you, and I think I told you over email, I first locked in on you as an audiobook narrator when I listened to Attica Locke's Heaven My Home, which came out, I think, 2 years or maybe a year ago. And I went on a long drive. I was driving up to a friend's farm in West Virginia, and I listened to your voice the whole time. Wow. And what I loved so much about your performance in that audio narration was the way in a single scene you were able to cycle through all these personalities, ethnicities, dialects, genders. I mean, there were so many scenes in that book where there were a lot of people in the room. And I wrote Attica on Instagram and said, how did you get this guy to do your book? And she was like, luck. I was like, can you help me get in touch with me? And she was like, I don't know if I can. So man, I don't even know how I got a hold of you, but I stalked you like I was a creep trying to get a hold of you. And when you agreed to consider it, man, it meant a lot to me. So here's what I want to ask you to start out with, before you set out to record an audiobook, let's say you've already agreed to take the project on and you're looking through a book, whether it's Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys or John Meacham's His Truth is Marching On, or Jason Mott's new book, Hell of a Book, which we were just talking about in the virtual green room. When you're trying to decide what you're going to bring in your performance, whether it be the weather of your performance, the tone, what are you looking for in the work to decide how to capture it on audio?
Actually, I'm just trying to be a vessel, to find the rhythm of the language from the author. So when you're reading it, you can kind of get a feel for their, I guess, the poetry in their expression. And once you read through maybe a chapter, at least for me, if I read a chapter and I read it aloud, and I get a sense of their rhythm, their pacing, what they care about, what they focus on, and you can kind of hear the musicality. Everything revolves around music to me. So I listen. It's almost like you can hear the music in the author's voice, and then once I feel that, it kind of gets easy from there. And especially if the author is very good at introducing I guess, the character in a way that you know them, then it's even easier because you feel like you can visualize that character in your mind's eye, the way they look, how their physiognomy, the weight of that person, the gravitas, whether they are a person who walks on their tiptoes or walks on the balls of their feet. You can kind of get a sense for who they are, and then once you get that sense, you go from there. It's just a part of your imagination kind of melding with the author's imagination in that way. So yeah.
Was there anything, and this feels all kinds of self-indulgent, asking questions about my own book, so I'm going to talk about it as if it's not mine, but what was it about When Ghosts Come Home, when you first read my novel? What was it that stood out to you that you said, this is something that I can bring something to? This is something that can maybe give to me that I can give to it.
It was the humanity of the characters. I could connect with so many different characters on so many different levels because there was such a sense of empathy for each character. Everyone was flawed, but it was a genuineness about their flaws and them dealing with their flaws that kind of spoke to you. Especially Winston is an amazing character. I know when this becomes a movie, there's going to be a line of people wanting to play this character because he's dealing with, and redemption is always. I love the concept of redemption, and that's Winston is dealing with redemption in a way. And also there's all these, I guess, it's easy for people to get caught up in, and I know it's a big part of the story, the racial issue. But for me, I felt the themes of shame, grief, tragedy. And there's even a line in there where you're talking about the clock at the end of the hallway, and how those things are like stored away and brought back to be revisited. And to me, that's like, we all deal with those things, on all sides of the racial divide. What connects us is that humanity and how we deal with those things as we navigate through life.
Sure.
So it felt like a very layered story to tell, and to bring honesty and depth to characters. It was an opportunity to do that, and you try as best you can, It's not like you actually get to study, take one character and study them for, 4 weeks in a performance. But this was one of those, books where you felt like you got to know Winston, Colleen, Jay, you got to know them intimately. So, yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. And just for folks who may not know what the book's about just yet, the setup for the novel, it's the fall of 1984, and a local sheriff on the coast of North Carolina on this very small island is awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of an enormous aircraft passing low over his house. And he knows there is no good reason for a plane of this size to be landing at this tiny municipal airport in the middle of the night. So he drives out 3 o'clock in the morning. He gets dressed, 63-year-old aging sheriff facing a tough re-election battle. And he arrives at the airport and finds a crash landed DC-3. It's too large for the runway. Part of the landing gear is damaged. The plane's completely abandoned. Later, they won't even be able to find fingerprints inside the aircraft. And lying alongside the runway in the grass is the body of a local man who's shot dead and left behind. And so Winston is left asking, where did this aircraft come from? Who flew it in? And this local man, who's the son of a civil rights leader and a de facto civil rights leader, a local high school history teacher, is the father of this dead man. And what, if any, role does he play in it? And so Winston, as you mentioned, JD, is this character who wants to do good, but he's burdened by so much. You said shame. That's the first word that came to mind, and I think you're right. And he's looking for all these ways to make good on maybe some shameful things or a thing he might have done in the past. And he really struggles with what is the legal thing and what is the ethical thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are a couple of instances where he mistakes the easy thing with doing the ethical thing, like when he fires the deputy in front of Bellamy, Ed Bellamy, and he's like, well, all the racial stuff's behind us. I fired the bad cop.
Right.
Can you talk about that relationship between Winston and Ed Bellamy, who is the father of the man who's found dead alongside the runway, who knows his son is not involved in drugs, all these rumors that spring up, and he knows his son had nothing to do with it, but he can't get anyone to really believe him?
Yeah, the relationship there is, I mean, it's hard not to give away too much, because where I really go to is towards the end of the novel, where that relationship really kind of takes on a different, it kind of means more, it's more symbolic in nature, which really spoke to me, where Winston has to make a decision. He's in a situation where he's at a crossroads, and Ed Bellamy in a way helps him. I guess in a sense, he's the conduit to him overcoming that shame that he experienced years ago in Gastonia. And there's a connection between the two because, and in that moment, honestly, that's where I saw a lot of what's happening currently in society, as far as, like what you said, the legal authority versus cultural memory,
Sure, yeah.
where those two things are at odds. What's the right thing to do versus what's the legally right thing to do? Am I a good man, or am I a person doing the good thing? I guess that's the right way to say it. But Ed Bellamy kind of confronts him on that level throughout the novel. He kind of challenges him, and he's relentless. So there's no kid gloves. Ed Bellamy is not, because Ed Bellamy he's like you said, he's crawled through, he's had to inch his way through life, and he's had to, get down there and take his shot. And that's the other, it's hard not to give away too much here.
Yeah.
Because that relationship, that scene at the end is so poignant, because there's so much going on there. But yeah, there's a confrontation between him and Ed Bellamy where he's challenging Winston. Yeah, you're the law. You can do this.
Yeah.
I know you the law, but you have a certain amount of power that I don't, and here's your chance to make right what went wrong those, so many years ago.
Yeah.
And the moment he makes that decision, you can kind of see, what's coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah,
And he, he kind of, and he also is really honest with Winston. Winston's facing this tough reelection battle against this much younger opponent. He's the son of kind of a wealthy real estate land developer. He's kind of playing on these nationalists, what we could call white supremacist
yeah,
sympathies. He's
right,
trying to, stoke racial tensions by linking rumors of drugs to the death
mm,
of Rodney Bellamy. And Ed Bellamy, Rodney's father, is very honest with Winston. He says, "You're not going to win. You're
right,
not going to win. You got a couple of days, literally, to try to do the right thing."
make it
And
right.
when you were reading this book the first time through, were you in your mind trying to nail down what all these characters' voices were going to sound like? What's the process of trying to do that?
Honestly, when you're reading you kind of, it's like a cheat sheet thing. When you're reading it, you get a sense, like I said, with really good writing, it's easy. Because just like when anybody's reading a novel, they use their imagination. They see the picture that you paint for them, and from their own perspective. And so as you tell the story of these characters, and we see the way they move, we see the way they interact with people, we see the choices they make, we see, the language they use. You can kind of mentally form a picture in your mind. You become kind of a casting director, and you say, okay, this guy's he's weathered. He's tired. He's got steely eyes. He's very focused. He's very sure. Um, he doesn't, and you get that, you get this, um, you know, Clint Eastwood, Jeff Bridges mashup, in your
Sure.
head. You kind of see it, you start to see people. And then sometimes you don't even see a person, it's somebody that was in your subconscious, and
Yeah.
a face just comes to mind. And then it just catches. And when that face crystallizes in your head, the voice just comes out. So it's a natural kind of, yeah, it's just an organic kind of process, for at least for me anyway.
There were two other characters. So there are essentially three main characters, 3 points of view that we're getting the story through. Winston, the sheriff who discovers this aircraft, is one of them. The one that follows most closely after that is his 25-year-old daughter, Colleen, who
Mm.
is fleeing this kind of struggling marriage in Texas. Shout out to Texas. I know that's where you are. Um, and she's come home kind of nursing this pain. How did you find your way into that character, that, you know, female perspective, all these troubles that she feels like she's kind of let herself down with her aspirations, her life has not ended up being what she wanted it to be? What was your way into that character?
Oh, that's easy. I think we've all experienced a little bit of that. And of course, disappointment and decisions you've made, you feel like you've made the wrong choices in life at certain points. We all go through that. So that was easier to connect with. And I think most readers and listeners will be able to identify with Colleen in that respect, as far as her potential and her making decisions that were unselfish, um, but not fully committing emotionally, So, yeah, I did this because it was the right thing to do. But inside, I'm like, oh, there's moments where I'm like she's looking at Scott like, oh, why
Yeah.
did I do the right thing?
Yeah.
And then as far as loss, well, I don't know what it means to lose, um, a child. And so as actors, what we tend to do is we try to relate what it was that we lost that was great, that meant a lot to us in that sense, and just empathy. You don't have to actually lose. You don't have to lose a child to understand the pain
Yeah.
it must be, for a parent, or especially if you've seen a parent who's lost a child and you've seen that emotion raw, up close and personal. Of course, you can't completely, you know, convey that as a person who's been through that experience. Um, can, but you do your best. You try to honor it. And, you try
Mhm.
to do the best you can to convey it. And that's all you can actually do is your best
Yeah.
in that situation. Yeah.
Colleen was a fun character for me to write because she was the character that kept surprising me the most, the way she would respond in certain situations, the way
Yeah.
she would feel so confident and then be so withdrawn in some situations. I never, when I put her in a scene, I never knew what she was going to do.
Hmm.
There's a third character, Jay. Can you talk a little bit about Jay? He is the brother-in-law of the man who's found dead on the runway, Rodney Bellamy. Jay's older sister, Janelle, who is kind of held up as an idol by his parents, as this perfect child who did everything right. She's maybe 10 or 11 years older than him.
Yeah.
And he is sent out to the country, out of Atlanta, because he got in some trouble in Atlanta. And his parents say, they know the score. They're like, you need to straighten up because you especially, and I'm thinking about Jason Mott's book, Hell of a Book.
Mm.
The laws are different for Jay. You can't do this. And you
Right.
got to go out to the country and get your mind right and live with your perfect sister and your perfect brother-in-law. And then he gets out to Oak Island, to the community where they live, and the world explodes. Can you talk about Jay's 14 years old. Can you talk about finding Jay in the narration?
Well, Jay is, yeah. I know what it's like to be Jay and to run with get caught up in situations with friends at that age when you're just trying to be accepted. And I think with Jay, a lot of that acceptance comes from the relationship between him and his father. His father is an older man, so he had Jay a little bit later in life. And his father is all about work. That's what his identity is. I work, I provide, like he said, I give you three things. So that's what I'm here to give you.
Yeah.
And he's very compartmentalized as far as how he approaches life and the people around him. And you get a sense from Jay that, well, you convey this very well, that, Janelle was closer because probably it was a different period in their lives when they were more hopeful, when they were more optimistic. And now Jay is coming to the picture where his father is a little bit more hardened about life, a little bit more pessimistic, a little bit more afraid. And that's where the fear aspect comes in. He's afraid for what will happen with Jay. And I can identify that, having three, sons of my own, that fear that listen, it's not just about, I don't want you to get in trouble, but I'm afraid for you getting in trouble.
Yeah.
And so I have to do everything in my power, even if you thinking, and he says this actually, Jay knows his father loves him, but there's a question, he initially questions like, oh, but he knows his father loves him. Yeah, but I know my father loves me. So there's this sense, as far as Big J is concerned, that listen, I love you, but it's more important for me to protect you. That's number one. And so if I have to send you away to protect you, I have to send you away. And Jay is still young. He doesn't understand that aspect of life just yet. He doesn't get it yet, which is why it was a beautiful scene starting him off there in that committing an act he shouldn't have done, not understanding the ramifications of it. And then leaving in shame, which is shame comes back again. He shamed his parents, he's embarrassed them. And so he's leaving town in shame. Now he's thrust into a situation where he does, it's foreign to him. Everything is foreign to him. He's in this town where there's all white people. He doesn't see the black people. He's like, where are the black people at? He doesn't fit in, so to speak. He doesn't fit in with the black kids. He doesn't fit in, with the white people. So he's kind of finding himself at a very crucial point in his life. And he gets caught up in a situation, which is very relatable because, it's real easy at that point in your life when you're trying to find out who you are and the world is trying to define who you are for you. A lot of issues can arise out of that. So I thought that was well done, showing him try to navigate through that and make some bad decisions, but you never lost sight of the fact that this is a good kid going through a difficult time in his life. So
and he was somebody who was really hurting, and there are parts in the novel where he just wants to hurt something, and his lashing out, which in many ways was deserved. His striking out in the way that he does is kind of what brings the novel like this kind of combustible, climax. It's not really the climax. It feels like it's going to be. The climax comes a little bit later. But I really wanted Jay to be, I wanted, Winston to be this very rational, almost like father figure of like just trying to keep everybody quiet, keep everybody settled. And Ed Bellamy is this more seasoned, wise, kind of knows the lay of the land, can see the scope of history and acknowledge the scope of history in ways that Winston's never really had to, because he's a white guy in the South. And then Jay, I wanted to be this combustible energy of just anger, right? That was kind of unchecked, because I want to acknowledge that. I wanted to acknowledge that anger is there, and that anger has to go somewhere, right? It just doesn't go away.
And it's warranted and it's valid, so yeah.
Who was your favorite character to voice in the novel?
Oh,
or was there a scene you particularly liked? Was there a scene you really liked that was really fun? Or
if I'm saying a scene that was, there were a few scenes that stick out in my mind. The scene between Winston, hands down, was I loved that character. But the scenes that stuck out, one is between Colleen and her mother, after they've left the grocery store, and Colleen's going through this pain, and her mother is, and it was so poignant when they get, it was poignant, it was funny, it was as far as I can't say exactly what took place, but I guess there's a moment in the car where they acknowledge Marie's mistake in the grocery store, and they just share a laugh, about, I'll just leave it as the stupid baby scene, the stupid looking baby scene. So there's that poignant moment that I just thought was great, great. And then, when Dove's Cry is playing in the background, so that was clever. I love that scene. I love the scene between Janelle and Colleen as well, when she's picking up the baby, and Janelle, just catches her in that moment. And the moment they share is just amazing. So yeah, those are the two scenes that really stuck out the most for me. There's a bunch of them, but those two scenes were amazing. So yeah.
You cool to take some questions?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, we have a question from Kirk. Kirk's home bookstore is Malaprops in Asheville, North Carolina. Kirk asks, JD, can you talk about your process? It sounds like you might be able to kind of pick and choose projects. How do you decide whether or not you're interested in making a choice typically, and how many takes would be typical for a chapter?
Oh, wow. As far as choosing, that you're always presented with the work, and you get a chance to get a synopsis, sometimes actually get the script, or they give you a breakdown of the book. And, so you typically just, early on, it was like, hey, whatever they give me, I'll take, I just want the work. So now I'm at a good place where I can actually, look at what it is, get a sense of the author, the work they've done before, and the story, they're trying to tell. And if it lines up with what I want to do, then I go from there. But as far as takes, when I'm self-recording, I don't even know how many times I stop and have to go back, stop, have to go back, stop, have to re-record. It could be, I don't know, 50 to 100 sometimes in a chapter. So it gets crazy sometimes, especially when you're, it depends on what time of the day it is, how many hours you've been going. And you kind of know when it's time to call it a day. So yeah.
Well, that's something that Kathy asks. Her home bookstore is Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, and Kathy asks, JD, is there a certain time of the day when you record, and for how many hours at a time? And do you get into the taping and start and change the voice of the character and go back and redo it?
Yes, that has happened. that has happened before. Now, what I'll say is, it depends. I'm getting to a place where I'm trying to take my time, because I was like, you know, if you get into this cycle where you're taking on book after book after book after book after book, then you get into these deadline issues and you find yourself working from, you know, 8 o'clock in the morning till like midnight the next day. I
Oh,
mean, so it can get crazy. And I'm pulling back now and saying, okay, I can't, you know, I'm out of this place of fearing that the next job won't come. So I have
yeah.
to just trust that, hey, the work will come. Just take your time. Don't kill yourself. But yeah, you can get into these, you know, these 15-hour, you know, one time I went, you know, like 20 hours, just, you know, taking breaks, 5 hour energy, get back in there. But, you know, I can't do that anymore. So I'm slowing up from that. It's not a good look anymore.
What is your, when you have that long recording days, your voice just
Yes,
bends?
I found, and that's the new thing, because you know before I felt like I had a, you know, iron voice that could, you know,
Yeah.
withstand anything, and you know, now as I've gotten into this, you know, when I got into that cycle of doing book after book after book after book and recording 10 hour a day and getting up, oh, I'll do it again, and then you know, as you get a little bit older, your voice says, listen, bro, it's you can't handle that anymore, and as a matter of fact, why don't you, you know, drink your tea before you start, you know, whether it's spray your throat spray before you begin, do your vocal exercises. You got to take it easy. So I've learned my lesson recently. So yeah.
Joyce, her bookstore is my sister's book and Polly, my sister's books in Polly's Island. Joyce asks you, JD, how many times do you usually read the book before recording?
One. I read it once. Honestly, if I could read it more than that, I would. But you know,
Yeah.
just because of time, it's impossible. But
Mhm.
yeah, one time.
You're getting a lot of praise on here for Nickel Boys and a
Oh
couple
wow.
of other books. Um, you've already talked about Winston, and someone asked me. Chanel asks, which character do you identify with the most? And JD, you said Winston. You know, I think, you know, having created these characters, or at least had these characters kind of come through me and find their way on the page, I think I identify with all of them
Mm,
in a lot, you
yeah.
know. It, and I'm thinking about Jay, you know, although I was a white kid growing up in the 1980s, I did a lot of the things that Jay does. Like I played a ton of basketball. The way, you know, I don't know if you played basketball or sports,
Mm,
but the way you like sniff out a kid when you meet him the
yeah.
first time, and there's a
Yeah.
scene where he and this boy or this white kid are sniffing each other out, and they're kind of playing to a draw a little bit, and then playing in the woods, and that lets me like kind of go back and think about and tap into like, what was I afraid of, what was exciting for me, what intimidated me, what was it like to be the outsider. And obviously I was outsider for different reasons than Jay was, but you know, all these characters resonated with me, at least
Yeah.
the main POVs really resonated with me, and that's what keeps me at the desk, you know, doing
Yeah.
this. And is it
Yeah.
what keeps you at the microphone, like trying to like keep in the headspace?
Yeah, I mean, with especially with a work like this, I mean, you're absolutely right. You can find, you know, pieces of yourself in all these characters. Um, yeah, I mean, being able to explore the psychology of each of these characters, you kind of learn a little bit about yourself.
Hmm.
You know, especially when, you know, you have so many rich characters that go through a change. You know, you can, and like you're saying, you pull little elements, you identify with them, like the moment you're talking about. I identify with that as well. Finding connections, or even you know, uh even you know, the story about him helping the kid, you know, when he would shoot the shots and rebounding for him.
Yeah.
I thought that was spot on. I've had moments like that, you know, where you see the kindness in people in these small, subtle ways. Um, yeah, and that where you know who they are based on those
Yeah.
things. But yeah, there's so many pieces to these characters where you kind of remember, or you think, you know, even the whole concept of ghosts coming home. Um,
Sure.
which I'm sure that, you know, you get that question a lot as far as Gastonia, you know, what does this book mean for you in
Yeah.
particular, you know, to that time, 1984, or Gastonia, what that actually, you know, what that was for you. Because immediately I'm thinking 1984, I'm like, I remember, that's one of the times in my life where I really felt alive. Like,
Hmm.
you know, it was so vivid to me as far as what I was listening to. what movies I was watching, what the political landscape was for the
Yeah.
first time, was the first time I paid attention to it. So I thought that was such a great year to focus on. And
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you that, like, why?
Yeah, well, we had a reader, Aaron, from the Bookshelf in Thomasville, Georgia, asked, why did I choose 1984? And the same, I was born in 77, so 84, I was just kind of becoming aware of political conversations. I was able to pay enough to the lives of adults around me, and I see all of this stuff happening. Growing up in North Carolina, in an old mill town, where white meant Republican, Republican meant Christian, Christian meant Baptist, and all these like defaults and all these identities that you just kind of inherit, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't question, they're just inherited, like eye color, and hair color, and all these things. You just inherit all these identities. And so you grow up hearing about Ronald Reagan, Jesse Helms, all these infallible kind of gods, right?
Yeah.
Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, JD,
Right,
remember them. Jimmy
Yeah.
Swaggart, Jerry
All of
Falwell,
it.
all these untouchable people in my community. And so in 84, that political moment, Reagan won 60% of the popular vote, 49 states. And we seemed on paper, to the eye test, especially in my community, like an amazingly cohesive, homogenized country.
Yeah.
And this is also the rise of the war on drugs,
right?
Suspicion of outsiders, the AIDS epidemic.
The AIDS epidemic, yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
manufacturing.
I remember, man, I remember Reagan. I remember that moment because I remember the feeling that I remember how my dad felt when Reagan was reelected. And it just seemed so opposite from what I was seeing on the television. And that was the first time I think I didn't know how to identify it, but I think that was the first time I was aware that, man, this is a different, my parents are living in a different America than what I'm seeing on television. Yeah, and I mean, then as far as AIDS and Indira Gandhi was murdered around that time. That was it was oh, and the Karate Kid.
And the Karate Kid, yeah, man. And
the
we're
Karate
thinking
Kid.
about, and when I was writing this book, I had just finished a huge book called Days of Rage about Weather Underground and all these political bombings and all this like political domestic terrorism that was being carried out in the 1970s, and just the great upheaval of the 1970s, which is a direct response to civil rights, which is a direct response to Vietnam, which is a direct response to the women's movement. And the 80s was kind of like the corny lacquered veneer put over all that stuff that we just had this kind of the smiling grandfather of America telling us it was morning again. And to a lot of people it wasn't.
Oh,
and
the crack epidemic was, and gang violence, and that's when I became aware of that. I remember it around that time when I first heard about gang violence in Los Angeles and Bloods and Crips. It was around that time where I was sitting on a curb and a friend's cousin had came into town, and he was telling us all these stories, and I was just like, oh my God, that's happening in the world, like in our country. So there was so much going on around that time. It was, this was a great play. And the interesting thing is, what I noticed is when you talked about integration and how close in time that was, closer in time than people realized. From 1984, we're talking about integration happening maybe a decade or so earlier.
Forced integration.
That stood out to me, how close it was to all of us. And that, that's the idea of time and those newspapers and, pulling them out and going back to them. We're doing that right now, pulling those newspapers out and revisiting them and how they affect what we're talking about right now, how it's so current. Yeah.
Well, despite all of these cultural and personal connections that JD and I are making, I feel like this is my first real mystery. I've been accused of writing mysteries before, which I've always appreciated, but I've always written books where the reader has all the knowledge. And the mystery is when the individual characters are going to have the knowledge the reader has. This novel is more traditional in that the reader doesn't know anything, and the reader is having things revealed. And I've read that you enjoy narrating crime, noir. What makes you like that genre in terms of narrating fiction?
It's just the getting inside the protagonist's mind is, being inquisitive and trying to peel back layers of people and places and situations and, circumstances and then how having it all just fall, in place. I guess that's just who I am as a person, just growing up, trying to figure things out, break things apart, how they work, get in there and figure it out. And yeah, so I love it. And plus there's a mood that's always in mystery. It's almost a cloud that you're waiting to see part. And so there's that element of it that intrigues me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we're going to pause there. And before we go, I want to announce that our winner for the giveaway is going to be Chanel. And I will send Chanel an email with instructions on how to download and join up for the 3 free months and 3 free audiobook downloads with Libro FM, which is one of our sponsors tonight. It's a great audiobook company, as opposed to the one linked with the website named after the river that Libro FM benefits independent bookstores in your community when you purchase from them. So I want to thank them so much for coming on board. And I want to thank Siba for letting us do this event. And JD, man, I want to thank you for answering that email or Twitter harassment or whatever it was. You just made it all worth it, man. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for choosing me.
Well, it's a pleasure, man. Good night, everybody. We'll see you soon. I don't know when, but we'll be in touch. And JD, big love, man. Thank you so much.
You too. Peace.